All right, welcome everybody to the second episode of the ID podcast. It is with pleasure that we have today actually 3 guests rather than 2 like last time. So again, we have Peter Murray with us, we have Jeremie Cantor, and a new guest with Fiona Davies. So Fiona, welcome to the round.
You.
And very excited for today. So just wanted to say, thank you to everyone who listened to the first episode, to the feedback that you've all given. It's all very well received, and I think the content that we put out was great. I think actually we should maybe put it as a paid podcast because there was some really good ideas. But never mind. Okay, so I think for today, obviously a lot has happened in the past few weeks. There was a great KPMG event in on the Isle of Man that most of us attended. And also, fines here, fines there, fines everywhere. So I think in the last few weeks and last few days, there's been some, fines being dished out to a lot of operators. So I guess, maybe to the round, what do you guys think? Especially with obviously the one that was with a person that spent over £140,000 over 12 days. Obviously it was way back, 2 years, but how do you think this would this will change the market, or has it got no impact on the industry at all?
Who wants to pick that one up first? I think, let's face it, fines focus minds, and a regulator having teeth around these areas is pretty critical to the whole system working. But what was interesting about that probably falls into your area more than most, Fiona, which is around, it's that failure of AML processes. That particularly, normally nowadays the fines tend to be around AML processes or safer, responsible gambling, harm minimisation. But that bit fell clearly into, 12-day period. They allowed somebody who had, the other interesting point was they had multiple accounts across multiple operators. Quite how you monitor that one, but certainly it would seem that the triggers and the flags that were in there were simply indefensible. And I'm assuming, let's face it, that operator will not have those same processes now. But I think what it says is, no matter how far back you go, even though the landscape now is very different, because that was 2 years ago, if they weren't right then, you're going to get fined now. Okay,
so Fiona, how do you see that from your point of view? Because obviously you are specialised in exactly that area, identifying if customers can afford to gamble, where obviously their money is coming from. So how would you see how can we change that in the future so these things don't happen, or is it always going to be like a case by case, let's say one a year or whatsoever? Or?
In terms of fines?
Yes.
I think fines are going to just keep coming thick and fast. I think we had that massive peak, which was 18 months ago from Malta. I don't think we're going to see big peaks like we did, where you're going to have 10 operators together being fined. But I think consistently the regulator is out there doing what the regulator needs to do, whether that be remote, whether that be land-based. We do a lot with the guys here in London, and there's a lot of pressure at the moment on those guys around the source of wealth and affordability piece. Huge amount of pressure. Very different to the pressure that the guys are feeling in the remote sector, in a quite a different way, because their players are, what I would call true whales. So it really does depend. I think if you look at the experience that we've had with our remote operators, the last 2 years has been huge change. You've gone from teams working in silos, small teams of compliance people, fraud teams separate. Now you have big responsible gaming teams working very closely with compliance, working closely with fraud. You look at what 888 did 18 months ago. They pulled their fraud and AML team together, and there's a whole new team there now with a whole new structure, going forward in a different direction. And I think there's some examples of some other operators that are fairly sizable that have had huge restructures in their organisation, bringing in tech, platforms, transaction monitoring, and trying to, their job is the amount of data that's coming in, and trying to create like an ecosystem where you can have one view of everything is really difficult, but it is happening, and that's kind of what we're seeing.
It'll be interesting to get your view, Jeremie, because a lot of this is around, if we look at the M&A activity that's going on, they're suddenly getting 4 or 5 brands, 4 or 5 different systems, 4 or 5 different ways of taking that data, and they're getting caught out for what they did. a couple of
This
years ago.
is the M&A and consolidation process is definitely going to be a challenge for that, just simply operationally speaking. But the true principle not to be lost by operators is how to connect the customer journey to the tech that is available in their hands. And those cases, Roger, that you were presenting as an introduction are a good example of sort of onboarding journey that looks like, hey, how are you doing with your gambling, sir? I'm doing fine, thank you. That was the pun.
Interaction.
It was very French.
Yes. The customer journey and the technology that is intermediating basically between the operator and the different actions of its players are merging into a very unique experience. This is also done thanks to the new regulatory requirements from last spring around the age verification upon registration. At the end of this month, where we will have the affordability checks that are going to become mandatory. We are talking about the UK framework, of course, but this is going to be undoubtedly expanded also to some other jurisdictions that are very closely looking at the UK and imitating most of the parts of the regulation. How are the operators going to be able to connect this customer journey within multiple brands, which might even have different set of technologies and platforms, just to make things worse. But how are they connecting all this information and onboarding a player with requirements of full identity check, knowledge, KYC, full affordability basically set? Can a player start to play today or very soon tomorrow in a world where he has not been fully verified from all those aspects: age, address, affordability, social status, social housing, or what else?
Well, I think come back to a point we made earlier, which was, I think the focus of your customers moved on from your, back to what we mentioned last time, I found you on sort of database, more towards the sort of services you provide, which is around understanding that affordability thing and that source of wealth, which is where those fines came from, is a really interesting area, because that's always been a real challenge for operators and providers into that space. The other point around where somebody's verified, it just wasn't acceptable. That's 72 hours when technology's moved on. So that's the right thing to do. And they've moved that forward to you have to do as much as you can. I think what's not clear, and everybody's asking for best practice, is what you do at that point. That's standard. I found you on a database. That's great. But then where do you add in or layering in that extra information that's out there? Because the challenge is around affordability. I think we're now in an area which is very much like the payday loan sector of a few years ago, which is it's no longer to know it's me, it's can I afford it? Well, how do we do that? What data's out there? Does the operator have the data? Do suppliers have the data?
But today, can you open a bank account, enter a bank, open a bank account without being verified? And not only identity and age, of course, but also financial status. It's becoming more and more difficult. Also, it's
becoming easier with Challenger Bank. You can open an account. I opened an account in a hairdresser the other day. It took me 2 minutes. I took a picture of my driving license. They zapped it. I said into the phone, "My name's Fiona Davies. I'm opening a account." Straight away, within 2 days, I had my card. They didn't ask for what I did for a living. They didn't ask for any core information. It's easier to get a bank account than it probably is to have a gambling account.
What's that? But what does that tell us about our industry when banks are more agile than we are?
Yeah. I mean, again, from my perspective, because I exactly said the point last time is there is certain industries that I think are going in the right way, and there's certain industries I think are making it too easy for fraudsters to. I mean, if I'm a fraudster, right, if it takes Fiona and hairdresser 2 minutes to open a bank account and the card arrive in 2 days, a fraudster group would open, I don't know, thousands of bank accounts within 2 days, and they're going to have all the cards, and obviously what happens with that, who's going to control this, right? So I think where the gaming industry is going is definitely in the right way, because essentially doing the due diligence, properly, you are, engaging with your customers. It's a totally different conversation. So, but obviously it's very hard to find that the perfect middle way.
You two more than us two will deal with the sectors, the banking sector, financial services sector. So where are the gaps in that process? If they've decided it's good enough for that really hardly any friction, nice and easy, what are they doing differently that the gaming sector seems not to be?
I mean, they're not doing anything different as far as I know. I mean, they're going into a person verification. They're doing the little gimmick with biometric, and obviously in the background they're doing some address verification with data. But obviously, the banks themselves, they might obviously have that person as a, let's say, ex-customer or whatever. So and they're doing pretty much the exact same. I mean, I don't know how it is on the source of wealth side or how they're doing that, but I mean, obviously the banks, they have to, as far as I know, essentially, as an example of a digital bank, is they do the document verification, they do a biometrics check, they verify the address that the customer has given them. They might ask for a utility bill. I don't know what the thresholds are here. And obviously the last one will be a PEPs and sanctions check, and that's all they need to do. So
I think what we're suffering from in the UK, a regulator that's just got very frustrated with the market, because they'll tell you, those regulations have been in place around triggers for a very long time. So why were they 2 years ago still going out and finding failings, and not even doing AML checks? And so I think the regulator got frustrated, especially with remote operators. And what we're seeing now is a kind of a backlash of that, unfortunately. You've got a certain sector of the gaming marketplace here in the UK doing an absolute standout job with the whole EDD around source of funds, source of wealth, particularly the Mayfair law. I mean, outstanding. But the pressure they're under now to go and collect pay slips from princes and sheikhs and people that are multi-billionaires. I mean, come on, you don't need to do that. But even they're being forced to do that because of what we've all been through over the last 2.5 years with what was uncovered within the remote sector around the total lack of questions being asked. And I think we've got to a place where we're in a little bit of a hole, and I think things need to change, because source of wealth and source of funds, there's so much data in the market that an operator can collect to have an amazing view of their customer, to be able to make a risk assessment with the very small percentage that might be high risk, that you can put some common sense practices around to say there's challenges there. Then let's look at the source of funds. But we can't. I think
it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt, Fiona. It's interesting that you mentioned that amount of data that is available out there for the remote operators around affordability and source of wealth, because I see two interesting aspects to that. The first one is that the major stakeholder that we're talking about here, the banks, are absolutely absent of the discussion and the whole debate around affordability. Yes, there is so much data within the banks that are processing and allowing the transactions through the transaction code for gaming to their customers. Why wouldn't we as the remote industry get any cooperation or partnership with the banks in order to know, they know better if this player has the access to the funds and proper funds before allowing those gambling transactions. And the second one is in terms of when you mentioned the EDD. When do the operators need then to process those checks? Because those checks from those companies that are providing this data have a cost. And processing age verification, ID verification, source of wealth information, social housing, etc. Verification has an accumulative cost that will become a burden that is not commercially viable for the operators. So,
well, I guess for the stakeholders, that obviously it costs you more to acquire a customer than they actually would spend with you, right?
And you've seen that in operators pulling out of the UK market because it's just not affordable for them to, the regulatory pressure is too great, and so they've decided to focus their efforts elsewhere. And I think that will happen more and more with the smaller operators.
But it isn't half of the problem we've got where we are as people historically have tried to do everything on the cheap, for want of a better expression. I think one of the quotes from the Gambling Commission here in the UK was using better quality data and technology. Because, I saw it in my previous life, which was they would just take whatever it was to tick a box that did that. Where actually the value now and around identity is more in the area of layering in affordability, source of wealth. The tick box is great, it does a job, but those things are going to come with a cost. So I think there's a challenge for the suppliers into that about how their commercial system works.
Well, the data and the value of the data around players was always around the player lifetime value and never around the player lifetime risk value or something like that, if we would call it today. And today the operators need to be able to balance those two aspects, the potential for risk or harm for the player itself. Those are the customer interaction requirements from the Gambling Commission, but also for the operator, because just like back in the good old days where chargebacks were like risks, internal risks for the operator, today a player that is not capable to afford his gambling is the new risk of the operator.
And I don't know where the answer lies for affordability. We've got to look back to payday loans, the sector, of how they embraced this challenge, if that's the right expression, because we have moved on, I think, more into the areas of. I'm really interested in the sort of what is out there and what's being used from a source of wealth perspective, and what people can access from that, because that falls into those areas. But it is different from demographics of, do you live in a part of the country that would say you've either got money or you're financially distressed, and how reliable and valuable is that information?
I think there's a lot of low-cost solutions that can be integrated via APIs that can plug into your ecosystem as an operator, because they're all now building these ecosystems in their back offices. I'm not going to mention the names because it wouldn't be fair, but there's lots of software providers out there that are providing these systems where you can plug in your fraud data, your IP data, your AML data, your ID data, your transaction data, and then you've got this overall view of a player. And I think there are lots of different data sources out there that can be provided. I think operators in the past have taken quite the easy approach to integrating for their checks. They've gone to one supplier that does all, a data aggregator. The top 10 operators do not go to data aggregators. They go to source data providers. They understand the data they're providing. They understand the value of it, and they get the best bang for their buck. And I think ongoing, you'll find more operators are going to be really understanding the data they're providing and not just buying it and going, right, tick a box, I've got my KYC data, not quite sure what's in there, but I've got 2 and 2 and there we are, off we go. I think people will get smarter, and I think operators are getting much smarter in the way that they're buying data. I think that'll be one of the things. I think,
essentially, obviously, I'm talking about, lowering the cost of things. So, there is actually an interesting quote that I took from the KPMG event on the Isle of Man, and it's from Lindsay Wright, and she's from William Hill. She's Director of Sustainability. And she said, operators have to work together to protect their customers, and all should want to do this. So here's one of the things which I guess is a low-cost thing. Why wouldn't all the operators, collaborate together and say, okay, let's actually, put something together that makes sense for us all, that will all be better for our customers, save us money, and then at the same time actually, okay, we're going to do this together, and do it. I mean, I know from a GDPR perspective, the people who are obviously the CISO officers, they'll be looking at me saying, no, we can't do this. But I mean, obviously, Jeremie, you've obviously been working for a long time in the industry at operators, and obviously, Peter, yourself, you've worked with a lot of operators as well in that kind of terminology. I mean, is there something right now that operators are looking to do together, or is there nothing at all?
This is going back to the beginning of the conversation around the consolidations and M&A. Companies that are growing and that have a lot of brands have difficulties to do that, to identify which ones are the same customers amongst their databases. So this is the first challenge. Before tackling the challenge on an industry level, and again, this tackling the challenge on an industry level requires all the partners, all the stakeholders of the ecosystem of the industry level to work together. This is not just the operators. You can put the platform providers and technology providers with that, but the banks and the affiliate ecosystem are two major stakeholders that need to be taken in consideration in order to be able to even discuss this.
Yeah. So Peter, how do you think we could bring all this together?
I think the interesting thing with Lindsay Wright saying that is what are they doing about it? Banding around the C word and collaboration, everything, that's fine, but what's the practical examples of that happening? And if we go back 10 years, there was no way that operator A would share anything with operator B, and I genuinely think if one said to the other that's a problem gambler, they'd assume it was a VIP because they were trying to protect them. So we are definitely seeing signs of people starting to have conversations, but we had a raft of harm minimization projects probably 12 months ago, 18 months, from 3 or 4 companies, and none of them were talking to each other. So I mentioned this last time, but it's what practical things are we doing? Are we sitting down at events and talking around it there? Because ultimately, she's absolutely right. When banks and financial services do it, why aren't we doing it?
You find that here in the UK, there is an organisation called National Casino Forum, and it's all the land-based, and they're very good at working together. Very, very good at working together, and they're working on something at the moment that I probably can't share, but they are doing something at the moment.
Please share.
There's also the ECA, so the European Casino Association, who we all know. And they don't necessarily have, they have an AML forum within the NCA, National Casino Forum, and that's very useful. Within the ECA, they have their annual sort of get-togethers and gatherings, and as a group, that's another great way for those operators. And that's a diverse bunch of operators. You've got casinos in the Nordics down to Monte Carlo, all over the place, very different, and they manage to be able to very openly in a trusted environment share. And I think that is lacking in the remote. We have got the association, the Remote Gaming Association, but that's just rebranded and coming back as something else, isn't it? I'm not quite sure.
Which is spokesperson for the sector. I agree. So we're saying the land-based sector has a far better approach to sharing data. That's what you're seeing?
Yeah. And there's stuff going on in Malta. I know that there's Manfred Galdes is trying to get together a forum out there for AML within Malta, and I think it is, everyone has got to come together and try to share ideas, because together they'll achieve a lot more than they are going to be in their silos. But it's hard because you still got to be commercially sensitive about what's important for your business. And it's we all sit in conferences where no one wants to ask a question.
Efforts are being done on the operator side more, if you look today, less on the casino aspect and rather more on the sportsbooks aspect. There are a lot of now sports integrity organizations to help this cooperation of data around the games and the information that might show any signs of corrupted games or activities. And you do see something that is quite efficient. The question is, on the casino side, because it is really just a house activity and a database that is being fueled by the affiliates that are churning those databases and turning them from one operator to another or from one brand to another. Can we compare those two sorts of cooperations? Land-based casinos have a lot of territorial specificities, which the remote industry doesn't have. So it seems very sad, but maybe realistically, this cooperation will happen once the consolidation will be reaching its peak in the UK industry, because there will be less smaller operators located offshore and having a UK activity, and more bigger.
So once you're saying once we're down to a handful of few mega companies, that's going to be easier for them to share because they're less worried about the competition?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess from that perspective, I mean, we obviously saw with the kind of merger deal going on, obviously Flutter and also the Stars Group. So, do you think that will help, let's say, the market if let's say now Flutter and the Stars Group combined? We've obviously got a monster with GVC. We've obviously got Kindred. I've got William Hill. We're obviously a big, but kind of on their own. So, do you think it will help the market if we have, let's say, 5 monsters instead of just one and 20 small ones?
First and foremost, in the consumer perspective, will consolidation help the market have a better offering that is fairer for the players? No, because less operators, less competition, less innovation, less higher margins for the operators, both in sports and in casinos. We most probably are going to see the return to players becoming less and less attractive in the remote industry, when there will be less and less operators able to access the UK market. But what we have to keep in mind around those consolidations is that those are all very big international groups as well, not only focused on UK, some of them reducing even their activity in the UK in favor of what is coming, of course, in the US, but other markets that are maybe less restrictive and more open to free competition,
such as South America and Africa.
And those companies are, most of them, public companies that have to respond to shareholders and to financial objectives. The day they will not be satisfied anymore by the cost of what brings them what the UK market brings them, they still have a lot around other regulated markets that will keep their reputation still good, but outside the UK, and the UK market will become a market that will be interesting just for any rich international, maybe Asian or African company that will come just for putting their name on a jersey of a football team. And in terms of
I think you're right.
offering for the consumer, this is going to be even worse, because they are not even going to target the UK.
I think if you were a startup now, would you be targeting the UK? And of course you wouldn't.
Absolutely not.
I mean, if it was me, I'll probably go to Mozambique or maybe Brazil. Or
So you'll see the big brands, say, spending millions on the US. And if you're a mid-tier operator, you're going, I'm never going to be able to compete with that, so I'll start looking at Brazil or wherever it might be. So the mergers and acquisitions, I think it's just a natural evolution of any marketplace. I don't care what it is you make or produce, it naturally gets to a point where people start merging to make efficiencies. And in our world, that's generally around regulation and compliance. It's really costly, really complex to have 15 jurisdictions. So you're gonna merge doing that. And when you're looking at your whole different supplier base and all the rules you've got to do, it's just a natural thing. But I think growth for the sector is certainly not going to be here in the UK.
That's why I think it's critical for the KYC industry as a whole also to find a proper, realistic solution to how to meet the needs of the customer journey from the operators here in this UK environment that is already very mature and developed in terms of regulations. Because if we take that to the US, with the amount of access to credit cards and things like that, this is even going to be both worse and even maybe more interesting in terms of quality of data, like you were saying, Fiona, earlier, because they will have access to a lot of data, but also a lot of potential fraud and a lot of potential risk from this spread of debt, spread of the financial situation of the US consumer. And if we don't want to see the same maybe obstacles being repeated in the US model, it would be good that the UK model takes the lead into finding a commercial balance between offering the right tool, the right product and offering basically for operators and the customer journey in a viable, commercially viable situation. And this is something that I still don't feel that the industry has achieved.
Do you see any difference between the areas you're working around source of wealth and let's say in the UK as the US to Asia to wherever? Are they essentially the same?
Yes, very different.
Yeah.
So if you talk about an EDD in the US, you're basically talking about a very basic AML report that costs at best $8. EDD to them is that it's not, because they're not been pushed by the regulator to have that. It's just not a requirement, and everything is led by the
What would be the cost of an EDD in UK? If you say it's $8 in the US,
150.
Anything from sort of 180 to 700, depending on the level. Like a remote one would probably be about 180. If you're talking land-based casino, you're looking at about 360 for an EDD, because the type of player is different, and that's on the lower end. You know, when I came into this industry 4 years ago, it was £1,500 to do an EDD, and we've worked really hard over the last 4 years to bring the cost down, to make the speed of the report quicker, and to do all that. So it's very different. You go to like Singapore, Macau, very, very much on it with regards to EDD, because it's very high risk. So it just, you know, we're seeing a ripple effect now across Europe in you know, Holland and France and places like that, Spain, where that's starting to come in. The regulators are starting now to say, right, we need to know about your high-end players, but it's only just beginning. You know, everything started here in the UK. You know, we've learnt from everything that we've done here in the UK. It's been a massive learning curve, and I think the American market is going to be interesting, especially because you've got, you know, illegal .coms all around America, because let's not kid ourselves, the Americans gamble, they're just not gambling in a regulated market. So they're all going to come in, and you're going to have all these, you know, big, huge operators from the UK supporting all these land-based casinos in the US, because that's how it's going to pan out. But they're still going to have to compete with .com, who are unregulated, can do what they want, because I think the American stuff, and I know we're here to talk about AML KYC, they're going to have a bigger challenge, I think, dealing with the unregulated markets.
So, I mean, we'd obviously now drifted across the pond, and we kind of predicted that in the first episode. I mean, obviously hearing on that, so I mean, there's a question to all of you guys. Do you think the US for gambling and betting will be a huge success, or is it kind of all hot air and it's gonna be nothing?
First of all, of course, it will be a huge success. It will be a huge success in the sportsbook, in the casino, maybe less in the poker. I think the hype is probably down. In the poker, it's going to be more of a niche product, but sports and casino, absolutely, no doubt.
I think the lifting of the PASPA ban changed everything. So the 4 or 5 years leading up to that, there was all talk and a bit of excitement, but it was all poker, it's all casino. But effectively where we are now is all bets are off. So everybody's throwing millions of dollars in, trying to get the brand up. But I think the US is the story's already written. I think the partnerships that were forged 4 or 5 years ago of the US being the market, effectively the marketing brand, backed up by a technology partner that we would regard as an operator, they've already got their feet on the ground. I think all we'll see there is potentially one big American organisation buying a European organisation. I think it's a sort of logical next step for me personally in the M&A activity. But I think if you're an operator, and certainly a mid-tier operator now, I wouldn't be going anywhere near the US. You haven't got the financial clout to do it. You know, when you've got to have Pennsylvania was $10 million to get a license. You know, great if you're the technology partner, you're not the one paying it. But if you're a mid-tier operator, you're going to go looking around and going, I'll keep well clear of the US. I'll let my competition spend millions of dollars getting up to speed there, and I'll go after these emerging markets, whether that be the raft of EU companies that are coming, countries that are coming, or you're going after places like LATAM and Africa.
Yeah, I did a bit of analysis on the Flutter.
Don't come here with facts.
EBITDA revenue figures for last year, and obviously their EBITDA was significant in their online. Their retail decent, but that's probably drives their brand. The US was down 15 million, but that's because they're investing. But who has got pockets as deep as them to invest? That tells you're not going to get, like you've just said, it's going to be the big boys that are going to go in there because no one else can afford to.
Okay, so for now, the advice to mid-tier and small-tier operators:
focus on Europe.
Don't touch US because it's probably
go
the
to
same
Greece. Go to Greece. It's going to be only 2 million. Go to Sweden. It's 700,000. Go to the UK. It costs you more than £200 per EDD per player. Don't go to the US where it costs you 10 million.
Yeah, so I guess it's
but it's $8 for an EDD check. Where would you do it?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I guess it's a little bit like with the New York taxi driver's license. If you read about it, so a few years ago, the essentially the license to be a taxi driver in New York cost over $1 million. Within a few years, it went down massively because obviously Uber came on the scene, and now a lot of taxi drivers are obviously complaining. Oh, well, hang on a minute. 3.5 years ago, I paid $1 million.
Like paying out for a London, paying out for a London cab. The investment you have to do in that. I just think the deal's done in the States, and it doesn't matter which state regulates next. And let's face it, it won't be all of them because the various politics that are in play. But those relationships, the other one that changed that was FanDuel and DraftKings, who opened up that, Paddy's were straight in on the FanDuel deal. But that's already set. I can't see anybody coming in and going, we're the next big thing. Play this back to me in 2 years if somebody has. But everybody else should be concentrating on something else.
I mean, as you rightly said, they have all the customer data, they have existing customer base they could just go out to. And off they go. I mean, obviously, once the regulation are set in each of the states, again, going back into the technology bit. So obviously, the US market is a very big and complicated thing, and especially on the document side of things. So I mean, as you know, only around 20% of all the Americans have actually a passport. So. That's only 20% of the people, and each of the states, they have different types of documents. So some of the states, they even have valid driving licenses that date back to 1940s, and there's about 20 different types of driving licenses. So my question is to you, so obviously now going to markets, but also existing markets like the UK, if it's obviously, let's say, the whole of Europe, the UK might not be in that spectrum soon, but do you think it's just enough if we do document verification to just do like a MAZ checksum check? Is it just enough to do a little bit of, I'm going to look at the picture, is it the same person, or?
No. is the answer to that. Nice and simple. Next. And how, again, we're back to technology's moved on and what companies can do around document verification, liveness testing. That whole area of biometrics, AI, is where the value is, I think, if you're an operator. It's who can provide that. And back to, I think we talked about it last time around the customer journey. Customers are not going to put up with the way it's been done previously. They are used to being able to use their phone to be able to order a car or, get goods from elsewhere. So I think the direct question of just MOZ codes, absolutely no, that's never going to fly. But that technology around documents and facial recognition and biometrics, absolutely, I think that's the way forward, tied in with layering in the sort of really valuable stuff around whether it be PEPs or sanctions, a source of wealth. Those things in that area there is the really valuable bit, I think, from an operator's perspective of what identity looks like. From my point of view, Jeremy, from yours?
I think this. I'm less expert in this area of the documents, but with the US, basically, this shows that this is going to become, of course, a cost of importance. We see compliance companies like GeoComply acquiring also their ID company.
That was really interesting.
And absolutely, this is because they have been at a sort of forefront of innovation, or maybe not innovation, but technological solution in the US that was completely regarded as, what is this technology, blocking cellular points, etc. We already know how to block IPs, where I remember when they started 10 years ago, the whole European industry looked at them as, why?
And you know what?
Who needs that?
Still do. I think GeoComply a really interesting one, because when I spent my time there, it was the regulators were obsessed with that technology, and I'm sat there going, well, that's not identity. It was where you are, not who you are. But they've clearly in that market, they've got about 100% of the market, and they're looking and going, right, well, how do I layer in that? And they've gone out and partnered up.
And today, the combination of all those data points lead to even something that is bigger, because who do we think about when we talk about convergence of those data points? Usually it's Apple, Facebook, Google, etc. And Apple is also pretty much starting to show its cards, I would say, in the gaming environment. It's becoming legit in the US. We might see we might see them make some more bolder moves today in terms of aggregation of the activity. Customer journey, again, single view of the customer journey. They have the single view of the customer journey. Once the products will be available and this aggregation of technologies along the customer journey will be accepted and a normal experience in the US, I believe that we will see Apple also move inside that territory. It will bring definitely some very interesting questions, not around just GDPR and privacy, but liability and responsibility in front of the ownership or the management, the handling of those player data. Will Apple become, in that case, liable for an AML assessment by the UKGC or any gaming regulator?
Well, it's you mentioned sort of at the start that who's going to be the moderator of this, the banks, and ultimately the real disruptor is if an Apple comes into that market, because nobody knows what you do.
Google, maybe?
What do they do? No, but you're absolutely right. The people who we will interact with.
Google have probably more personal data than anyone else has, and I mean, obviously they have YouTube added to that, so add even more data to that. There's obviously some companies, and we didn't want to name drop, but then again, it's a little bit unfair not to
I think I broke that rule ages ago.
Name drop them. But if you look at companies like an example like Emailage, right? They do really great work when it comes to checking actually the history of email addresses. Have they been connected to any frauds whatsoever? And if you think about it, there's no one who does what what they are doing. And I think it's great when you get someone like that, again, a disruptor, innovator like Comply. 10 years ago, everyone looked at them, what are they doing? And now when you speak to people in the industry, they say, you made it, well, I don't know if that's going to help me. Well, I mean, obviously, I guess the email address is the whole kind of holds even more data than the banks maybe do.
But then it's layering in stuff. We sort of come full circle back to the, how much information you've got. That's in my view, pretty valuable. Email address is how we generally communicate to start with. That and mobile data is the other one, cell phone data. But the point you made earlier is how you pull that all together. You're an operator with all this wealth of data coming out there. Then how do you make sense of it? So whether it's that data aggregated,
employ 100 business intelligence people.
Yeah, you could do it.
Data analysts.
It's a tad expensive. So surely technology must be. We know where we're going with this. There's that technology there, whether it be an aggregator of all of that or one particular one like an Apple who will come in and deliver that. That's where I think the future is going to be, because all of those things are really valuable in their own right, but also a bit useless in their own right because it doesn't solve the problem of understanding your customer. So I'm not saying knowing your email address is not important.
It's interesting because even if we don't want to bring it to philosophical levels or things like that, but it really definitely raises the question of what is the role of an operator? Is an operator a tank of data points of a user, or is an operator, like what it used to be until not long ago, the curator of an experience of game content and activities that it's offering to a supermarket, to call it more vulgar, to its players. So we are shifting the focus. All those regulatory requirements are shifting the focus from the role of the operator to become the entertainer, from being the entertainer to become the liable for all the data of its users and consumers.
I mean, I think it has a little bit to do with because we're saying, with regulators, they sometimes they don't know what the market even holds and stuff like that. So I think kind of the operators are now taking a position where they're becoming a hybrid of, okay, we're going to help you how to regulate, but at the same time, I need to do what I'm doing. I mean, we spoke about self-regulation again last time. And obviously, for operators, doing this. So, in the future, is it even going to make money for the operator to when obviously everything's shifting towards them? Are they going to make any money because they have to do this, they have to do that?
Absolutely. The question is, what is the future for the small and medium operators today, which is probably the question in any industry that is facing a lot of consolidation movements. But I think this is a very relevant question.
There's so much bad press, isn't there? Like iPlayer had 3 documentaries last month about, gambling operators not being responsible and the harm that it does within the sector. And it was quite interesting at the Isle of Man summit, and I don't know who it was that said, but I think what operators have got to do, and I think many are, they put their customer in the centre of the universe, and they have to care and protect that customer, because that customer's life journey is the lifeblood of their business. So
I think it might have been Dan Vore, because he did some pretty good points around that.
Was it?
Yeah.
And but I think if they can get across that they care about the player and they're asking these questions because they don't want them to play responsibly, and then that player then trusts that brand and then they stay with them, because at the moment what you have is there was so many lovely operators that I work with, knee-jerk reaction 18 months ago where they had to go and ask lots of questions, and they lost a lot of their players because they went from not doing that much, then having to do quite a lot, and in that time they lost a lot of their valuable players. But it's because they were learning about how you start asking those questions and how you can be keep that player happy but keep them retained in a responsible way. And I think it's hard, and I think we're a new industry. This industry wasn't here 10 years ago.
Certainly not as it is now. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we're going through that pain, and I think putting the customer in the middle of it, I think is really important, and just changing the mindset.
Well, you mentioned Lindsay right earlier, and people of that ilk. when they say that, you generally think they mean it. The challenge for the industry is for everybody to mean it. And we all know there's people who won't, but if certainly the big brands step up, and then that becomes sort of standard operation. I absolutely agree that customer-centric, customer-first approach to things is the only way for sustainability and trust. And whilst we might throw those two words around a lot, I think in 3 or 4 years' time, 5 years, that's going to be what makes a difference. If you want a genuine brand differentiator, is do you trust brand A to A, do the right things with your data, B, treat you like a VIP at all times, and then look after you in that customer life cycle. That 5 years down the line is what's going to make or break companies.
Well, maybe not treat them like a VIP at all time. That's the problem for the Gaming Commission. It is true that it's important to treat the players as VIP, but this has become the problem today. They don't. The regulators are suspicious of good treatment like a VIP of the players if the player didn't pass all the checks, all the affordability, all the KYC, etc. And this is something that used to be the brand USP and the brand differentiation. But today, the brand differentiation is not going to be possible if the marketing relationship, everyone, trust becomes mandatory. It's fine. It's basics of business. It's weird that we got to that point that most of the brands were not trusted, but that's a failure. That was not the strategy. So still, what will be the future of differentiation, where there is going to be more and more consolidation? White label model, as we discussed also during this Isle of Man e-gaming summit, is in danger, and probably for good reasons, because there has not been enough control on what it properly means operationally speaking. But what is the future for small and medium businesses in the gaming world, and therefore what is the future for differentiation of the offering to the consumer? And that's why I think that this is not very optimistic vision for the future of consumer fairness and offering in this industry.
Yeah, so Fiona just mentioned it before on the point that obviously, we've seen a lot of like documentaries about that gambling is obviously shattering lives and obviously making the whole world bad. So do you think sometimes operators are unfairly criticized, and again, for the disruptors, for the innovators like the mid-tier and obviously the low-tier kind of operators, that they're going to be out of business because there's just like this whole as I call it, gambling bashing going on TV, and every politician is trying to get involved to get some sort of clout, because they're obviously being the heroes of whatever. But do you think they're being unfairly criticized right now?
Yes and no, I guess, is the answer to that. I think that some of the situations the industry's found itself in have been absolutely our own fault. Whether it's doing your KYC or your EDD at the back end of it, not treating the customer fairly at the start. But I think those are gone. I think those are a thing of a couple of years ago. I don't think it's in anybody's interest to do that. And then the rest of it is just because, and we've mentioned this before, the political nature of what we do is just an easy political football to have any politician who wants to have a bit of a pop at something and get themselves on the news, just have a go at gambling. And there's a couple of high-profile, prominent people out there at the moment who, if they want to be on the news, just have a pop at the gambling sector. But I still think we have to be aware that some of this is our own fault, and raising the bar and doing the right thing and treating the customer fairly.
I think this has been, or this is still ongoing, a good reality check, to use a compliance word of the industry, for the industry, because at the end of the day, affordability is not only for the consumers and for the players, it's also for the operators, the stakeholders. Can you afford to take responsibility and to be liable for what you're going to offer to your consumers, to your end users, to your players in this market? You better have the shoulders financially, you better have the pockets in any market, but also in terms of responsibility and accountability and how far you're going to be able to protect your consumers and offer them a fair business. This is, at the end of the day, almost a business 101 reality check. Can you afford offering the business, the products that you are offering to your players? Show us that you're responsible.
Fiona, what you think is a kind of, I mean, because you obviously have to deal with some really, let's say, urgent requests, right, Fiona?
Less so than a year ago, to be honest, which is a good thing. I think where we're at the moment is the entail of everything that happened 2.5, 3 years ago, and that's where we're at now. And I think operators are being responsible in the main. I think they do care about their customers, and I think there were a lot of risk takers, and you're running a commercial organization over, and until the regulator's going to say this is how it is, and they go out and they look under the bonnet, then some people will take that risk, and that's what's happened. But that is not where we're at now. And I just think this whole affordability thing, though, is going to be super interesting over the next 6 months, because I don't know how it's going to pan out. What's being asked of operators is pretty excruciating. And, at what point do they make an assumption on someone's affordability? You could earn 150 grand a year and at the end of the month not have anything in the bank account. Doesn't mean say you haven't got any money, it just means you like spending it. Like, at what point does affordability start and end? I don't think anyone's got the answers for that, and this is going to be an interesting thing over the next 6 months.
I absolutely agree with that. You've said if having 3 cars is a sign that you're going to be all right. Well, where I grew up, every council house has 3 cars if your kids are over 18. They just do, because everybody's got a car. So it's what's relevant. There's so much data out there what does it mean? Yeah. So, and I think the affordability, back to the payday loan sector, is the key issue. You can tell the regulators to have this, use best practice, but jeepers, what does it mean? Just look at the salary that a big salary you might be on, but spend it all.
Exactly. But then again, we go back. How do we, as gambling operators, how should they know that customer A has, let's say, an income of let's say over £100,000 per year, but how do they then know that he has 10 things on finance, being 5 cars that he bought for his 5 ex-wives, and is spending all of his money? So
I am convinced that at the end of the not of the day, but this will happen quite as fast as a day, it will be the consumers, the players' responsibility to prove his level of net available income to his operators before he will be allowed to play more than certain thresholds. The Gaming Commission has started to identify statistics of average available income. It will come very soon. It's the end of the prescriptive regulation in the UK, but it will come very soon that they will say, okay, available income in the UK on average is £1,000 or even £500 per month, and I think I'm already optimistic. No player, for one brand especially, that we know that there are always 3, 4, 5 brands in parallel being used, is allowed to lose more than £100 a month, unless he proves.
I guess it goes back to, okay, are we going to do this at deposit, or are we going to go at the losses, right? Because I think it will be irresponsible to let someone who only has, let's say, £500 left over for the month, to let them deposit £500, because the money's there. He's not, it's not going to go away.
And let's not talk about joining up online bookmakers with remote, and what you can do in a bookmaker via what can you do online. I mean, it's not a level playing field for everyone. And Germany, I think it's Germany, is it now? You can't spend more than €10,000. You've got to write a letter in to ask to spend more money. They've changed the regulations.
I think it's one of the Nordics as well, but you're absolutely right. If we take your instance of average salary being, say, I think the last ad was 25,000 pounds a year in the UK is the average salary. So are they then going to take what the average house price is? So what's the average mortgage? What's the average bill for food? What's the average bill? So it's almost like you would have to do when you're applying for a mortgage. Is the Gambling Commission or the regulator going to say, right, that means the disposable income for your average person is £500 a month?
I don't think we need to go that far.
Yeah.
It's not a question if we need. It's a question if we expect the regulators to bring us to this situation.
But maybe the industry needs to get together and say, why don't we all agree that we need to take control of this and we need to ask our players, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with adults. So ask that adult, how much are you prepared to lose a month playing sports betting, whatever it is? What are you prepared? The responsibility's on them because they're an adult. Then you can do your basic checks and check, how old is that person, where they live, what their job is, and so you take a joint responsibility, because all the responsibility can't be on the operator. It always has to be with the person.
Yeah.
And it's not.
No, but I agree. All adults should be able, but that's not going to happen. The regulator's never going to say, I've got responsibility for that, because what happens if it is a problem gambler or somebody's up for?
If I overmortgage myself and overcommit myself financially, that is actually down to me.
Correct, but that's not the way the regulator looks at it. Has the person giving you that money done enough checks on there? Now, not clearly, people will get around that. But I do think we're going to end up at a point where they're going to put an arbitrary figure before you really have to start providing stuff or information along how much you spend every month. I can't see how we're at this rate and the way it's going. I can't see how we avoid it. It's wrong, in my opinion.
I think, again, this affordability thing is frightening, because I don't know what it's going to mean for operators.
Well, are we going to
start?
That's a quote you want to use there. I think
and absolutely, and I think, let's say, New Year, probably end of January, when we see the next, throwing fines out memes, coming out, and me posting them on Twitter.
But interestingly, on that, could you go at the end of January? You've got to lower your limits because everybody's skint. Yeah. We're all paying our bills. The regulator's going, you can gamble a lot in July, but I'll tell you what, you can't gamble in January when the bills are coming.
Yeah, see, and that's another thing, right? So why are you giving the operators? Obviously, as we know now, I guess, from the whole conversation, the operators are the almighty, I don't know how to call them. They have to do everything themselves, I guess, and have to maybe, regulate themselves in a few years as well. But,
I think that was a debate last time. That's never...
Yeah, I know it's never going to happen, because, there's too much, obviously, politics involved, and we all love politics. We all love Brexit. We all
He's
love
determined to get this Brexit thing.
We all love IDpodcast. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this case, I'm gonna wrap this up for today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and again, we could have probably talked for another 4 or 5 hours. So, and also, that be said, I'm definitely going to bring back Fiona for
that means us to her out.
Had enough of bringing Jeremie. For another podcast, because and next time we're gonna come extra prepared. I'm gonna put my glasses on, get my head down, read all about Brexit in the Daily Mail.
Let's do a Brexit special. I'm not seriously think we do it. Yeah. It impacts the industry.
Yeah, I think we should put some. Yeah, never mind.
We'll compete with Brexit cast. We'll do what we all do. I don't know what it means.
All right. So no, thanks so much, guys. As I said, it was an absolute pleasure. And
thank you very much, Roger.
Wish you a very nice week, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
So if you like the content and if you like the episode, please be sure to leave a like, to follow us on Spotify, and also to subscribe on YouTube. And we're looking forward to having you next time.